The fluorescent lights hummed their endless song above her head, the same song they'd sung every shift for 3 years, and Megan O'Brien had learned not to hear it anymore. She moved through Oak Creek Memorial's pediatric oncology wing like someone who had learned long ago that invisibility was a survival skill, her white sneakers silent on the linoleum, her movements efficient and small. The hospital smelled like it always smelled, antiseptic and stale coffee and something else underneath, something like fear that nobody wanted to name. She'd smelled worse. She'd smelled blood and dust and things that didn't have names yet, so the hospital didn't bother her. Her locker was in the basement break room, 3rd row, metal door with a dent that had been there since she arrived. She spun the combination lock with fingers that had held steadier things than this, and pulled it open to check the time on her phone before her shift began at 0700. The boots were still there, hidden under her extra scrubs, their leather worn soft as skin in places, rough as concrete in others. Combat boots, the color of old coffee, laces that she'd tied 1,000 times in the dark and never forgotten how. She reached down and touched one, just a brush of her fingertips against the instep, then closed the locker without taking them out. Some things weren't meant for daylight. "You're early again." Maria, the day shift charge nurse, stood in the doorway with 2 cups of coffee, offering one with the kind of smile that didn't ask questions. Maria never asked questions, which was one of the reasons Megan had lasted 3 years in this place when the VA had chewed up everyone else and spit them out. "You know we can cover the morning med pass without you." "I know," Megan said, taking the coffee. Her voice came out the way it always did, quiet enough that people had to lean in a little to hear her, which meant they usually didn't bother. "Just like to be ready." Maria nodded and left without pushing, the way people do when they've learned that some folks keep their walls up for good reasons. Megan stood alone in the break room for another 30 seconds, holding the coffee without drinking it, watching the steam rise in shapes that didn't last. At 0658, she headed upstairs. Pediatric oncology at Oak Creek Memorial was a specific kind of terrible. The walls were painted in pastel colors, soft blues and yellows that someone had decided would make dying children feel better, and there were stuffed animals in the corners and drawings taped to the walls showing stick figures with hair and stick figures without it. Megan had learned to look at these drawings without seeing them. She'd learned to hear the sound of children crying and not let her hands shake. She'd been a senior chief petty officer in the United States Navy for 17 years before the night in Kabul when everything went sideways, and compared to that, 3 years of watching kids fight cancer was almost manageable. Almost. She was checking the medication refrigerator at 0715 when the commotion started in the main hallway, the kind of commotion that came with uniforms and authority, the kind that made people stand straighter and talk faster. Megan didn't look up from the vials in her hands. She didn't need to look up to know what authority sounded like. She'd worn it on her collar for most of her adult life. "Suite 312, the admit nurse was saying, her voice pitched high with the particular respect reserved for people with stars on their shoulders. "We've prepared everything, General Hawthorne. Your son will receive the best care we have to offer." "General." Megan felt something settle in her chest, something she thought she'd buried in the Raleigh dirt 3 years ago. She closed the refrigerator door slowly and made herself turn around at a normal pace, made herself count her breaths the way she'd been taught. In through the nose. Hold. Out through the mouth. The kind of breathing that kept you invisible. The man in the hallway wore his authority the way some men wore expensive suits. 4-star General Bradley Hawthorne. She recognized him from the hospital newsletter they posted in the break room, a piece about his appointment to some command, though she'd never really read it. She'd learned to stop reading things about the military after she'd been gone long enough that it hurt. The general was tall, the kind of tall that came from standing up straight your whole life, and he moved with the controlled purpose of someone who'd never had to apologize for taking up space. Beside him was a Marine in dress blues, a sergeant with a face that had been rearranged by flame, significant burns down the left side, the kind of scars that told stories about minutes that went wrong. And on his forearm, visible below his sleeve, was a tattoo. Megan's tattoo. Her call sign. Angel 6. She turned back to her work before he could see her looking. The boy arrived at 0832. His name was Marcus, 8 years old, deaf since birth, and he was seizing when they wheeled him through the pediatric oncology doors. Not his first seizure, the admit paperwork said these had been happening for 6 days, getting worse, progressively more violent, and nobody could figure out why. No prior seizure history. No head trauma. No metabolic abnormalities on the initial labs. Just a small boy's body convulsing on a stretcher while his father watched with the kind of stillness that came from being trained to accept loss. Dr. Hargrove arrived at 0917, radiating the particular confidence of a man who'd never been told no by an insurance company. He was tall in the way tall men usually are, taking up room because he'd never thought not to, and his suit cost more than Megan made in a month. She noted this without judgment. She'd learned not to judge things like that anymore. He gathered a team around Marcus's bedside in Suite 312 with the efficiency of someone used to commanding attention, and by 1100, he'd made some phone calls and assembled 12 specialists. 12 doctors. Megan heard about it in the break room, passed along like gossip. A pediatric neurologist. A pediatric cardiologist. An endocrinologist. A pulmonologist. An immunologist. An infectious disease specialist. A toxicologist. Pediatric nephrology. Genetics. Critical care. Oncology, because Marcus had been referred with the thought that maybe this was cancer-related, though nothing on imaging suggested it. And a consultant from Johns Hopkins who'd made the drive to Raleigh in the morning. 12 different opinions, 12 different specialists, all of them looking at the same small boy. By 1445, the consensus was clear, untreatable. The word passed through the hospital hallway in the way words do. Untreatable. Progressive. Deteriorating. Terminal. The general's son was going to die, and there was nothing any of them could do. Megan was pulling records from the file room at 1603 when she saw it. A detail in the admission labs. Lead levels. Not sky high, but elevated. Elevated enough that if she looked at the full history, the notes from the clinic visit 6 months ago, the environmental exposure questionnaire that nobody had flagged, the picture shifted. The seizures. The tremors she'd seen documented 2 weeks prior. The progressive confusion in his behavioral notes. The recent weight loss that had been attributed to stress. Lead exposure. Toxic. Chronic. Not immediate, but destroying the nervous system in slow motion. She'd seen it before. Marjah, 2011. A compound where the water had come from an old military depot, and 6 of her operators had developed tremors and confusion before anyone figured out what was happening. She'd carried 2 of them out on her back, 1 mile through active fire, ammunition cooking off in the heat. The third one hadn't made it to the evac point. Megan pulled up the boy's environmental history and traced the exposure back. New house, for months ago. Renovations. Old paint. Dust. Water from a well that hadn't been tested. Toys made overseas, lead paint on the handles. The picture came together like a photograph developing in solution, and she understood with absolute certainty that 12 specialists had looked at the same data and missed the thing that was killing the boy. She was still reading when Dr. Hargrove found her at 1621. He approached with the kind of quiet that preceded anger, the way air goes still before a storm. His cologne arrived first, something expensive and aggressive, and then he was standing in the file room doorway with his arms crossed. "Those charts are restricted," he said. His voice didn't raise. It didn't need to. Nursing staff don't access diagnostic records beyond direct patient care. Megan looked up from the file without rushing. She'd been trained in subordinate command, which meant she'd learned how to take orders from men like this without flinching. Environmental exposure section, she said. Connected to his seizure progression. Lead poisoning, likely chronic. Well water, probably, based on the property records. Hargrove's face didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. A calculation. A reassessment. For a moment, she thought she saw him actually considering what she'd said. Then his jaw tightened, and the moment passed. "Return the chart," he said. And remember your scope of practice, Ms. O'Brien. You're a bedside nurse. Not a diagnostician. Not a specialist. Not someone whose job includes reviewing test results. She closed the folder and stood. He was taller than her, and he positioned himself so that she'd have to brush past him to leave the room. An old power move. The kind of thing that was supposed to make people back down. She'd learned 17 years ago that backing down was a choice, so she did neither. She simply stood with the chart against her chest and waited. He left first. At 1847, Sergeant Chen came to the pediatric floor to relieve the Marines at General Hawthorne's door, rotating watch, professional security detail, the kind of thing military families got when they reached his level of rank. Megan was checking vital signs on another patient when he passed by, and she heard him speak to the general in that formal, respectful way that junior enlisted used with 4 stars. His voice was careful. His left side was burned bad enough that talking probably hurt, pulling the scar tissue. She didn't look at him. She didn't let her eyes track to his forearm where the tattoo was, where her call sign was written in military-grade ink by someone who'd wanted to remember. Angel 6. The name she'd gone by for the last time 17 years ago, the name she'd buried in Arlington dirt and cremation ash, and the kind of forgetting you could only do if you stopped answering to it. He walked right past her, and he didn't recognize anything except the back of a blonde nurse in pink scrubs, standing silent in a hallway, invisible as she'd been invisible for 3 years. By 1900, Dr. Hargrove had made 4 phone calls. Dr. Hargrove waited until Marcus's father stepped into the room at 0847, his uniform crisp as a knife blade, for stars catching the fluorescent light above the boy's bed. The general's aide stood 2 steps behind, Marine straight, watching everything. Megan was adjusting the full line when Hargrove's voice cut through the monitor's steady beep. "Senior Chief, a word." His tone suggested it wasn't a request. The general's eyes narrowed. Megan finished the task, precision mattered more than obedience, then turned. Hargrove's smile was the kind a shark wore before feeding. "I've been reviewing your notes." "Touching, really. You're concerned for the patient. But you understand we have actual specialists handling his care. 12 of them. Board certified. Licensed. You're a nurse. A very nice nurse, but let's be honest, you're out of your depth here." The general watched her face. Megan's breathing stayed level. 1 measured inhale. 1 measured exhale. The kind of breathing taught in SEER school, taught in bunkers, taught in rooms where showing fear meant something worse than embarrassment. "Your job," Hargrove continued, moving closer so only she could hear, "is to keep him comfortable. Not to play detective with his charts. Not to question 12 physicians who spent more time in medical school than you've spent alive." He turned to the general. "She means well, sir. Some of them develop hero complexes. Happens in pediatrics." The aide's jaw tightened. The general said nothing. Megan met Hargrove's eyes and nodded once, a gesture of understanding that conveyed nothing of what she actually understood. She had seen men like this before, men who wielded authority like a cudgel, who confused rank with knowledge. She had also seen what happened when they made decisions in operating theaters at 2 in the morning. By 1100, word had spread through the pediatric oncology unit the way rumors spread everywhere, like contagion. Megan sat in the break room with her coffee, watching the steam rise in thin threads. The door opened. 2 nurses saw her, exchanged a glance, and left. Within 8 seconds the room was empty except for the hum of the refrigerator and the sound of rain beginning against the windows. She didn't move. She didn't react. She simply waited for her coffee to cool, then drank it, then washed the cup and returned to her station. By 1430, the write-up appeared on the unit board, laminated and dated, Hargrove's signature precise as a surgeon's incision. Megan read it standing between 2 medication carts that no one had told her to move. Disciplinary action, the header read in bold. Staff member identified as a nurse O'Brien engaged in an authorized review of patient medical records beyond scope of practice. Multiple instances of insubordination documented. Violation of physician-nurse protocol hierarchy. This behavior represents a breach of professional boundaries and poses potential liability to Oak Creek Memorial. Recommend mandatory retraining and supervised duty assignment pending further investigation. One tear escaped her eye, not from shame, not from fear, but from the sheer waste of it. The waste of 12 specialists looking at a child and seeing only complexity, when the answer had been visible to anyone trained to see beyond blood work and imaging. She wiped the tear with the back of her hand, never breaking eye contact with the paper, never looking away. Then she walked to Hargrove's office. The door was open. She stood in the frame, not entering, not inviting a scene. "You should hope you never need someone who actually knows what they're doing," she said. Her voice was still water, no current, no ripple, perfectly level. "Because when that moment comes, doctor, and it will come, you won't recognize competence. You've forgotten what it looks like." Hargrove's face darkened. He stood. "That's insubordination. I can have you terminated." But she was already walking. Down the hallway. Past the supply closet. Past the pediatric wing where Marcus slept, his small body breathing steady oxygen, his small heart still beating despite the toxins flooding through his system that 12 board-certified specialists had missed. What Hargrove didn't tell anyone in his 15:30 phone call to the compliance officer was why he needed her gone so urgently. It wasn't the insubordination. It was the charts she'd been reading. It was the fact that she'd seen what the battery of tests actually revealed, that Marcus didn't need another MRI, another endoscopy, another exploratory procedure billed at $15,000 per investigation. He needed a test for heavy metals. A single screening, covered by insurance at $400, that would show the lead exposure that explained everything. 12 procedures at $15,000 each. $180,000 in billable hours. Hargrove had already submitted requests for 3 more advanced diagnostics to the General's premium insurance plan. The approvals were pending. The revenue stream was locked. Until a decorated senior chief petty officer with a memory of Marjah dust in her lungs started asking questions. At 0206, the monitors above Marcus's bed began their fractured song. The child's breathing changed first, shallow, rapid, a bird trapped in a cage. Then the O2 sat plummeted. 89. 84. 78. The on-call resident, Dr. Torres, moved toward the bed, but his hands moved like a man underwater. Uncertain. Slow. Cardiac tamponade, Megan said. Not a question. She was already moving, muscle memory taking over, hands reaching for the ultrasound probe and the spinal needle before anyone could tell her to stop. The machines around her seemed to shriek, the ventilator hissing, the monitor screaming its alarm. The fluorescent lights blazed overhead like a desert sun. For a moment she wasn't in a Raleigh hospital. She was in a forward operating base in Helmand Province, watching a Marine with his abdomen open to the sky, watching blood pour onto sand that drank it like water. She was holding gauze to a wound that wouldn't close, hearing the crack of incoming fire from 3 directions, hearing Corman Rivera calling for more blood, more hands, more prayers. The smell of copper and burning metal filled the air. The sound of rotor blades overhead mixed with the whistle of incoming rounds. The sand clung to everything, her hands, her scrubs, the Marine's uniform, the blood. So much blood. She could taste it, gritty between her teeth, mixing with dust and fear. She blinked. The desert was gone. The spinal needle slid between Marcus's ribs with a whisper. Megan's hands were steady as a surgical laser. 18 gauge, she said. Get me the ultrasound. The probe found the fluid collection immediately. 40 milliliters of blood compressing the child's heart, crushing it like a fist around a bird. She withdrew the needle. The fluid flowed, thick, dark, alive. O2 sat at 62. Climbing. 68. 75. 81. He needs a chest tube, Torres said, his voice small. He needs drainage and a transfer to cardiology, Megan corrected. Not a tube. Blood. Type O, 2 units. Now. The code team arrived at 0214, 8 minutes too late. Marcus was already stable, already breathing easier, already back from the edge of a cliff that 12 specialists swore didn't exist. The team leader looked at Megan like she'd performed a resurrection. Dr. Hargrove stood in the doorway, pale as hospital gauze. By 0600, when the sun hadn't yet risen over Raleigh, Hargrove had made 4 calls. 2 to board members. 1 to nursing school. 1 to an outside compliance investigator with instructions to build a file on unauthorized medical procedures. He moved with purpose, with the precision of a man protecting something far more valuable than a patient's life. Security escorted Megan out at 11:47. She didn't cry. She didn't argue. She carried the cardboard box containing her boots, the only thing personal she kept at Oak Creek Memorial, and walked through the lobby while every nurse who wasn't on the floor watched her go. The rain fell hard outside. She sat in her car in the parking lot and made no phone calls, sent no messages, told no one why she'd been terminated. Not her ex-husband. Not her sister. Not her 9-year-old daughter Emma, who she'd promised to pick up at 3 o'clock. The kitchen table was where Emma found her at 1400, still in scrubs, still in the car, staring at nothing. The child's small voice broke through the silence like a bell. "Mommy? Why are you home early? Did you get fired like Daddy?" Megan looked at her daughter, at the confusion in her eyes, at the small hands holding a backpack she'd carried to school expecting her mother to work until evening. She thought about Marcus. She thought about the 12 specialists who saw a complex puzzle instead of a simple answer. She thought about a 4-star general's aide with her call sign tattooed on his arm, standing 5 feet away, unable to recognize the blonde nurse who'd carried him 3 miles through enemy fire. She thought about quiet people. About the ones who didn't speak until it mattered. About the ones who held their composure until the moment required them to be someone else entirely. "No, baby," Megan said, and pulled her daughter into an embrace that held years of silence. "I just needed to be here." Outside, the rain continued its assault on Raleigh, washing the streets clean, washing away evidence, washing away everything except what mattered. In a hospital downtown, Marcus slept peacefully. In a city across the country, an FBI agent was beginning her 18th-month investigation into insurance fraud. And in a kitchen table that smelled like coffee and fear, a decorated military officer held her child and didn't explain that everything was about to change. The monitors tracked Marcus's heartbeat like a metronome counting down. 84. 86. 90. Normal. Stable. The pediatric oncology ward hummed with the white noise of machines, and Megan had tucked him into bed at 22:15, checked his vitals one last time, and settled into the rhythm of night shift. 3 hours of quiet. 3 hours of the kind of peace that only exists in hospitals after the fluorescent day has burned itself out. Then the alarm screamed. 0306 hours. The monitor didn't whisper. It didn't suggest. It shrieked, a sound like electronic panic, the kind that makes every nerve in a trained body snap to attention. Megan was already moving before her conscious mind registered the numbers. She had been 8 feet away, charting at the station, and her body simply responded. Muscle memory. The kind that doesn't ask permission. Cardiac tamponade. She knew it before she reached his bed. She knew it the way you know a smell, visceral, immediate, unmistakable. Marcus's little chest was heaving like he was breathing through water. His oxygen saturation was dropping in real time. 94, 88. 81, his lips were starting to turn grey at the edges. "Get Dr. Hargrove," she said to the night resident, barely a whisper. The resident's name was Chen, 26 years old, 2 weeks out of medical school. His face had already gone white. "Now. Tell him cardiac tamponade. Go." Chen didn't move. He stood there like a statue, like his legs had forgotten what they were supposed to do. Megan didn't repeat herself. She reached the bedside and her voice dropped an octave. "Move." Chen ran. She didn't have time for panic. She didn't have time for the 17 regulatory violations she was about to commit. She had maybe 6 minutes before Marcus's heart stopped entirely, before the fluid crushing his chambers made it impossible for the organ to beat. The boy's eyes were wide with terror, and Megan placed one hand on his shoulder. "Stay with me," she said, and her voice was steady as a metronome. "You're going to be okay. I need you to not move for the next 30 seconds. The ultrasound probe was already in her hand. She'd grabbed the portable unit from the crash cart without thinking about it. Her fingers moved through the motions, a procedure she'd executed in the field in Marjah with sand in her teeth and incoming fire close enough that she'd felt the percussion of bullets hitting stone. This was cleaner. This was pediatric. This was inside, where the temperature was regulated and nobody was trying to kill her. But the physics were the same. She positioned the probe against his left chest wall, just below the nipple, and the screen bloomed with the ultrasound image of his heart drowning in its own sac. The pericardial fluid was dense, bloody, pool dark gray on the monitor. 40 milliliters, maybe more. For an 8-year-old, it was everything. It was the difference between a heartbeat and asystole. "Code team ETA for minutes," someone called from the doorway. The night supervisor. She didn't ask what Megan was doing. She saw the ultrasound. She saw the probe. She understood. Megan's hands moved on their own. She set down the ultrasound and opened the emergency kit with one smooth motion, the kind of motion that comes from having done it 1,000 times, from muscle memory that has its own intelligence. A spinal needle. 18 gauge. She didn't need the big one. She needed precision. She talked to Marcus while she worked. "The scar on your neck, that's where you had your feeding tube, right?" His eyes were on her face, tracking, present. "You survived that. You survived the surgery. This is going to feel like a pinch, and then you're going to feel better. Your heart's just wearing too much water. We're going to fix it." She prepped his skin with iodine. The smell of it, that sharp, medicinal copper, filled the small space around his bed. She found the angle, 5th intercostal space, mid-axillary line, just below the pericardium. The needle went in with a soft resistance. 1 breath. 2. There. The moment the needle entered the sac, blood rushed back through the catheter like she'd cracked open a dam. The monitors screamed again. This time they were screaming good news. The pressure around his heart was releasing. The chambers could expand again. "Suction," she said, and the night supervisor was already there with the tubing. They extracted the fluid slowly, not too fast, not too slow. The balance between relief and collapse. 15 milliliters. 20. The boy's oxygen saturation started to climb. 81, 84. 87, his color was changing, the gray leaving his lips, the panic leaving his eyes. The code team burst through the door at 0314. For people in scrubs, equipment clattering, the sound of organized chaos. They stopped cold. Megan extracted the last of the fluid, 40 milliliters total, and sat back. The needle came out clean. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was even. The attending code physician, a woman named Dr. Raleigh, looked at the monitor. Looked at Marcus. Looked at Megan. "What happened?" "Cardiac tamponade," Megan said. "Toxic fluid in the pericardial sac. The lead exposure from Marjah. He needed drainage." Raleigh's eyes narrowed. "You performed a pericardiocentesis." "Emergency pericardiocentesis." The boy was deteriorating. He had maybe 6 minutes. Megan gestured to the monitor, where Marcus's oxygen sat steady at 92. "He's stable now." The room went so quiet you could hear the ventilator in the adjacent room. Raleigh stepped closer and looked at the catheter site, clean, precise, exactly where it should be. She looked at Megan. "You're a nurse." It wasn't a question. "Yes," Megan said. The formality slipped out automatically, the voice of someone used to chain of command, used to deference, used to the architecture of hierarchy. Chen was standing in the corner with Dr. Hargrove, who had arrived 40 seconds too late to prevent his cash cow from being saved by someone else. His face had the look of a man watching a house fire from the inside. His lips were moving but no words came out. He understood what had just happened. He understood that someone in this room, a nurse in pink scrubs, had just executed a field procedure with textbook precision. He understood that his carefully constructed narrative about her incompetence had just died on the monitors. Dr. Saleh called for a portable chest X-ray, ordered labs, started rattling off the post-procedure protocol. Megan stepped back into the shadows where she belonged, watching Marcus's chest rise and fall with the relief of pressure that had nearly killed him. But Saleh wasn't finished with her. As the code team moved into their choreography, the attending pulled Megan aside. "Where did you learn to do that?" "I took an advanced trauma course," Megan said. It was technically true. It was also, in the arrangement of words, a lie by omission. "You took an advanced trauma course." Saleh studied her face. "And you're working night shift in pediatric oncology? At Oak Creek Memorial?" "Yes." Saleh's eyes dropped to Megan's hands. Scarred. Calloused. Marked with the kinds of lines that come from handling equipment designed to save lives in places where most people would pray not to go. She looked back up. "What's your name?" "Megan O'Brien." Saleh repeated it quietly, as if testing how it sounded. As if something about the sound of it meant something. Then she turned back to Marcus, where the real work was beginning, the work of making sure the boy stayed stable, stayed alive, stayed in the world. What Dr. Saleh didn't know was that Megan was already thinking ahead. She was thinking about the moment Dr. Hargrove would call the board. The moment he'd realized that his investment in destroying her had just become an investment in explaining why he dismissed her as incompetent when she'd just saved his insurance money's favorite patient. She was thinking about how long it would take him to rewrite the narrative, to call in favors, to activate the network of board members and compliance officers who owed him drinks at the country club. She was thinking about the fact that every second she'd spent watching Marcus crash and responding to it, every second of muscle memory and training and the kind of calm that only comes from having already survived the worst, had been a clock counting down to something much bigger than cardiac tamponade. And then her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from her ex-husband. "Emma's asking why you're not picking up. Where are you?" It was 0318 in the morning. Her 9-year-old daughter was awake. And Megan was still in scrubs, 40 milliliters of a child's blood on her gloves, understanding with absolute certainty that Dr. Hargrove was not a man who accepted being outmaneuvered. At 0600 hours, Dr. Hargrove found Megan in the medication room, her gloved hand still holding the empty syringe. He didn't speak. He simply closed the door behind him and pulled out his phone, his movements deliberate as a surgeon prepping for an operation. His face had gone pale during those 8 minutes when Marcus's heart restarted, not from relief, but from the sudden clarity that a senior chief petty officer in pediatric scrubs had just dismantled 18 months of planning. The boy lived. That was the problem. By 0615, Hargrove was on the golf course with board members via speakerphone, his voice smooth as he planted the seeds. "Concerned about our nursing protocols," he said. "She performed a procedure without attending supervision. Spinal needle in a child. Could have been catastrophic. We're lucky." The silence on the other end told him they were already calculating liability. He didn't mention that she'd saved the child's life. Numbers didn't matter. Fear did. At 0823, he called the University of North Carolina School of Nursing. Performance records for Megan O'Brien, graduate of 2009. "We're conducting a safety review." The registrar hesitated. HIPAA concerns. But when Hargrove invoked the child's name, 8-year-old Marcus Hawthorne, General Hawthorne's son, doors opened. He wasn't asking for scandal. He was asking for documentation. Papers. He would do the rest. By 0951, an outside compliance investigator named Patricia Chen was walking the 3rd floor with a clipboard, her face the blank canvas of someone following a paycheck, not a conscience. Hargrove had briefed her for exactly 17 minutes. Unauthorized procedures. Scope violation. Patient safety concern. He hadn't mentioned the pericardiocentesis had worked. He had only mentioned the words that would fill her report. At noon, security appeared. Soft-voiced. Professional. Not hostile. That made it worse. Megan didn't resist. She removed her badge, the motion small enough to miss if you weren't watching. She opened her locker. Inside, beneath extra scrubs and a half-eaten protein bar, were the boots. Worn. Cracked leather at the heels. She'd kept them hidden for 4 years, the only artifact of the woman who used to exist. Security wrapped them in a cardboard box with her nursing school diploma and a framed photo of Emma at age 5. The boots went in last. Like a coffin. You're being terminated for insubordination and practicing beyond your licensure scope, the security officer said. His name tag read Mitchell. He'd worked the ER for 6 years. They'd eaten lunch together twice. I'm sorry, he added quietly. It's not your decision, Megan said. Her voice didn't crack. That was discipline. That was training. She walked out with the box balanced against her hip, her posture the same as it had been walking through the maternity ward that morning. No one watched her leave because Hargrove had scheduled it during the shift change, the hallways full enough that she wouldn't be alone, but the staff scattered enough that no one would feel compelled to say goodbye. The rain began as soon as she hit the parking lot. Not a gentle Raleigh drizzle. A downpour. The kind that sounds like a standing ovation. Water soaked through her scrubs in seconds, cold enough to make her breath come in small, controlled pulls. Her car was parked on the 4th level of the garage, the furthest she could get from the hospital entrance. She'd done it subconsciously for 4 years. Distance. Always distance. At 1,400 hours, Megan sat at her kitchen table in soaking wet scrubs. The cardboard box was on the floor. The rain hammered against the window so hard the glass seemed to bow. She didn't turn on the lights. The overcast sky was enough. Her hands were shaking, not from cold, from the particular tremor that comes when adrenaline has no place to go. She'd spent 17 minutes on a kitchen chair before the first tear fell. Soldiers don't cry. But this wasn't a soldier anymore. This was a woman who'd chosen to become a nurse so no one would ever know. She pulled off her gloves. There were traces of Marcus's blood still under her fingernails, dry to a dark brown at the crescents. She'd saved him. 40 milliliters of fluid extracted with precision. His heart had restarted. His oxygen saturation had climbed from 68 to 94. The monitors had shown sinus rhythm. Clean, steady, alive. And they'd fired her anyway. The quiet of the house pressed down. Emma was still at school. Another 3 hours before the bus dropped her off. 3 hours of sitting in wet scrubs in the dark, understanding that Hargrove had moved faster than she'd anticipated. She'd thought she had time. She'd thought that saving a child would matter more than whatever administrative pressure he could generate. That was naive. That was the kind of thinking that belonged to a decorated operator, not to Megan O'Brien, just a nurse. She opened the cardboard box. The boots were on top, wrapped in brown paper like something from a funeral home. She picked them up. They weighed almost nothing. Leather and memory. She'd carried them through 2 divorces, 3 states, and 4 years of deliberate obscurity. She'd never worn them. She'd simply kept them in a locker the way other people keep insurance policies, proof that the old life existed, in case she ever needed to remember. Her phone buzzed. A text from her sister, "Hey, you alive? Haven't heard from you." She didn't answer. The boots fit differently now. Her feet had changed shape. Life does that. She held them and considered the corner of the yard where the garbage cans were. One swing of her arm and they'd be gone. No evidence. No proof. No reason to ever think about Marjah or Helmand Province or the woman who'd been called Angel 6 in the dark hours before an extraction went sideways. But something stopped her. Not sentiment. Not nostalgia. Something colder. The knowledge that the moment she threw them away, she became fully what everyone said she was, just a nurse. Not someone who'd carried for operators through a kill zone. Not someone who'd learned to think in trauma medicine because trauma medicine kept people alive. Someone disposable. Someone Dr. Hargrove could fire with one phone call. The boots went back in the box. At 1,402 hours, she heard the front door open. Emma's voice, excited, breathless with the particular joy only a 9-year-old could produce when school ended early. "Mom? Mom, teacher said we could leave at 2 because the assembly got cancelled and..." Emma stopped in the kitchen doorway. Megan was still in wet scrubs, still in the dark, still holding a pair of boots like they were the last valuable thing in the world. Her daughter was small for her age, all angles and curiosity. She had Megan's eyes. She had Megan's father's dark hair. "Why are you home?" Emma's voice was small. Careful. A child who'd learned to read a room. Megan set the boots down. She didn't wipe her face. She'd earned the right to let the tears be visible. "I lost my job, sweetheart," Megan said. Emma's expression shifted. Not confused. Too understanding for someone who was 9. "Did you do something wrong?" Not accusatory. Just the question of a child who'd watched her father disappear from a job, from a house, from her life. "No," Megan said. "I did something right. And the wrong person noticed." And then, somewhere beyond the sound of rain and a child's breathing and a woman's quiet tears, there was a different sound. Distant. But growing closer. The kind of sound Megan had trained herself to ignore for 4 years because it belonged to the life she wasn't living anymore. The kind of sound that made her spine straighten and her eyes focus and her hands go still. The sound of helicopter rotors, cutting through the rain like a blade through silk. The rotor wash hit the parking lot like a physical force, and Megan's hands went still on Emma's shoulders. Not the sound of a news helicopter or a medical transport. This was military. The rhythm was wrong, too heavy, too deliberate. A Black Hawk. She knew the signature before her mind caught up to her body. Her daughter looked up, confused by the sudden tension in her mother's grip, but Megan was already moving toward the window, already calculating angles and exit routes, already accessing muscle memory she'd spent 3 years trying to bury in scrubs and anonymity. The helicopter descended onto Oak Creek Memorial's rooftop helipad at 0900 hours exactly. Through the kitchen window, Megan could see the distant silhouette rotating through the rain, landing gear extending like talons. Her phone didn't ring. That was how she knew it was serious. When they came for you, they didn't call first. They showed up. She was still in her scrubs, wet patches where rain had soaked through when she'd sat crying on the porch an hour ago. Emma tugged at her sleeve. "Mommy, what is that?" Her daughter's voice sounded small, frightened by the sudden shift in her mother's attention. Megan forced herself to breathe. To look down. To be present. Just a helicopter, baby. Maybe someone at the hospital needs help. The lie tasted like rust. What she didn't expect was the knock on the door 17 minutes later. 2 Navy Masters-at-Arms stood on her porch in dress blues, insignia bright against the grey morning. Not local law enforcement. Not hospital security. Federal. The taller one, whose name tape read Halverson, held a folder against his chest like a shield. Senior Chief O'Brien. His eye scanned the house, cataloguing details, the peeling paint, the old sedan in the driveway, the single mother trying to disappear into ordinary life. The question wasn't really a question. Megan stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind her. Emma's face appeared in the side window, small and uncertain. "I'm Megan O'Brien. You can lower the formal." Her voice came out steady, but her hands had already begun the unconscious preparation, cataloguing exits, assessing threat level, shifting weight to the balls of her feet. Operator posture. The kind of thing 12 months of attempted civilian life couldn't quite erase. "We need you to come with us, Senior Chief." General Hawthorne is waiting at Oak Creek. Halverson didn't say please. Officers of her rank didn't get pleasantries. They got orders wrapped in polite language. She looked back at Emma through the glass. At the cardboard box with her boots still sitting on the kitchen counter. At the life she'd built from nothing, careful, quiet, deliberately small. Give me 2 minutes. She wasn't asking permission. The voice that came out wasn't the apologetic nurse's voice anymore. It was the voice of someone who'd given orders in languages most people couldn't pronounce. The voice that made people move without thinking. Halverson's jaw tightened. He recognized the shift. Yes, Senior Chief. Oak Creek Memorial's administrative wing had never seen a Black Hawk pilot in the same room as a 4-star general. General Bradley Hawthorne stood in Dr. Hargrove's office, which wasn't his office anymore, had never been his office despite what the nameplate suggested, holding a pair of worn combat boots in both hands like they were made of crystal. His aide, Sergeant Matt Chen, stood behind him with his scarred face angled toward the window, the right side of his jaw reconstructed from skin grafts and titanium plate. The burns that had melted half his face had left him looking like a before and after photograph no one wanted to see. 3 years ago, those same burns had been fresh. 3 years ago, he'd been bleeding out through a shattered femur and a collapsed lung in a firefight outside Sanjin Valley. 3 years ago, a woman with a call sign and enough rage to move mountains had dragged him 3 miles through enemy fire to an extraction point while rounds snapped overhead like angry hornets. The boots in the general's hands bore the scuffs and wear of someone who'd walked through deserts that wanted to kill them. The call sign was barely visible on the inside of the left sole, faded to almost nothing but still readable if you knew what you were looking for. Angel. That was what the team had called her, though the name had nothing to do with mercy and everything to do with the fact that she'd appeared in the worst moments and made the impossible happen. Sergeant Chen's eyes went wide when he saw the boots. Then he looked up, and his scarred face went through 5 different expressions in as many seconds. Recognition. Confusion. Certainty. The faded black ink on his forearm, her call sign tattooed directly over the artery that had nearly ended him, seemed to pulse. But he'd been burned so badly that his ability to distinguish faces had been compromised by the contracture of his facial muscles. The blonde nurse in pink scrubs wasn't the tan operator with short dark hair he remembered. She was a ghost. She was impossible. Marcus, the general's 8-year-old son, sat in a wheelchair pushed into the corner of the office. His lips moved in rapid succession, hands flying through sign language that his father understood perfectly. The general glanced down at his boy, then back at Megan, then at the boots. His hands had begun to shake. "My son says," the general started, his voice like a tank idling in a garage, "that you have the same name as Uncle Matt's angel." He paused. The angel who saved his life. The general opened her personnel file with hands that trembled enough to make the papers rattle. He read aloud, each word landing like a detonation, Navy Cross. Marjah, Afghanistan. Citation reads, "For extraordinary heroism in action against an armed enemy force." It continues to describe operations that are still partially classified. His eyes lifted from the file. In them, Megan saw the moment he understood. The moment a 4-star general realized that the woman he'd watched his doctor humiliate was not just a nurse. She was a warrior he'd probably read about in a classified brief he'd forgotten 5 years ago. The door opened. A man in a dark suit stepped forward, Naval Criminal Investigative Service. Behind him came another. Then another. And then came the one who made Megan's spine straighten. Gator. Her former SEAL Team 3 leader. His beard had gone grey at the edges, but his eyes were still the color of the Atlantic before a storm. He saw her and for a moment, the room forgot how to breathe. "Speak," the general commanded. It wasn't a request. It was a command structure. Megan was already moving at attention by instinct. Gator stepped forward, his presence making the air pressure change. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone who'd buried friends. 3 Purple Hearts. 2 Bronze Stars. He paused between each decoration like a prosecutor listing evidence. and a silver star urn dragging for operators through a kill zone at Sanjin while taking effective fire. She was hit twice. Kept moving. His eyes locked on hers. Angel 6. That's who you've been. The FBI agent stepped forward, his badge catching the fluorescent light. Dr. Robert Hargrove is currently under federal investigation for insurance fraud, illegal billing practices, and conspiracy to defraud Medicare. That investigation has been ongoing for 18 months. What we didn't expect was for him to attempt forging a licensed nurse's credentials at 0247 this morning in an effort to justify her termination before she could expose him. The agent's voice was matter-of-fact. Clinical. The forgery triggered an automated FBI audit. The fraudulent documents were intercepted before they hit the hospital's legal system. We caught him in real time. Hargrove was already in the building. He didn't know yet. But he would know in approximately 47 seconds because that's when security would find him in the pediatric lab trying to alter dates on a nursing credential document he'd stolen from Megan's personnel file. That's when his hands would start to shake. That's when he would understand that he'd just committed a federal crime on camera. The general handed the boots to Megan. She took them. The leather was still warm from his hands. Senior Chief O'Brien, the general said, and those 4 words contained a lifetime of recognition. I don't know why you chose to hide. But I know why you stopped hiding. Because a child was dying, and your code didn't allow you to walk away from that. He gestured toward the door. Dr. Hargrove is about to exit the building. He's going to exit through the main entrance during shift change. Every nurse, every doctor, every staff member you've worked with for 3 years is going to watch what happens next. She moved toward the door. Gator fell in beside her. When they passed Sergeant Chen, his scarred face turned to follow them, and for the first time since the burns had healed, recognition flickered across his features. Not visual recognition. Something deeper. The way a body remembers someone who'd saved it. The hallway cleared as she walked through it. Word had already spread through the hospital's invisible network, the kind of network that moved faster than email or text. Something was happening. Something serious. Doctors emerged from offices. Nurses stepped out from medication rooms. The administrator who'd watched Hargrove post the disciplinary write-up went pale and disappeared back into his office. Hargrove came through the administrative wing doors at 0913 hours. He had the look of a man who thought he'd gotten away with something. His suit was pressed. His hair was combed. He was already calculating his next move, already planning how to explain the missing documentation. He didn't see Megan until she was directly in his path. He stopped. His eyes went from her to Gator in his navy dress blues to the 2 masters-at-arms flanking the hallway entrance. His face didn't drain all at once. It drained in stages. Color left his cheeks. His lips went white. His hands, which had been so steady when signing the disciplinary paperwork, began to shake. What? He started. You're under federal arrest for insurance fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to defraud the United States government, the FBI agent said, and the words landed with the precision of a surgical strike. Hargrove tried to back away. One of the masters-at-arms moved forward. Handcuffs clicked open. Hargrove's mouth moved but nothing came out. His eyes found Megan's and in them she saw the exact moment his brain caught up to his situation. The woman he'd tried to destroy was the reason he was about to lose everything. The cuffs went on at 0914 hours. By 0916, he was being escorted through the front entrance during the morning shift change. 47 nurses, 32 doctors, and 104 hospital staff members watched him pass. No one spoke. No one moved. The silence was so thick you could operate in it. His shoes made soft sounds on the tile, squeak, 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 with each step toward the FBI vehicle waiting at the curb. The rain had started again, gentle and persistent, and it fell on his pressed suit like judgment. 18 months later, Dr. Robert Hargrove stood in a community college gymnasium in Raleigh wearing a polo shirt with CPR instructor embroidered across the chest. The name tag read Robert H. because apparently even small anonymities mattered when you'd lost everything. He was teaching basic life support to a class of healthcare workers who didn't know his name, didn't know his history, didn't know what he'd done. His salary was $16.50 per hour. His license to practice medicine had been permanently revoked. His pension had been seized. His wife had filed for divorce. When someone called him doctor, he flinched and corrected them with the quiet shame of a man who understood that his former title had been a lie he'd been living. But that was 18 months ahead. In the immediate now, Marcus sat up in his hospital bed, the lead still attached to his chest, watching his father's face as the general looked at the young woman he'd thought was just a nurse. Marcus's small hands moved through sign language, asking questions his father would answer later. Megan knelt beside the boy's bed. She pulled the boots from the cardboard box, the only things she'd taken from her locker when security escorted her out, and set them gently on the mattress beside him. These belong to a story, she signed, her hands moving in the precise language that required the same precision as battlefield medicine. A story about a woman who went to war. A story about a woman who was hurt so badly she thought she couldn't help anyone anymore. A story about a woman who almost believed the world was right, that she was broken and useless and couldn't fix anything. Her hands moved slower now, more deliberate. But one day, a little boy got sick. And the world said he was broken too. They said he would never get better. They said to give up. And the woman remembered something important. She remembered that giving up is something you choose. And she chose not to choose that. For you. Because that's what warriors do. We don't give up on people. We especially don't give up on people the world has decided to throw away. Marcus reached out and touched one boot. His father stood in the doorway, watching his son's face, understanding for the first time what true strength looked like. It didn't wear a general's stars. It wore scrubs and carried pain like most people carried groceries. Through the window, Emma watched her mother, really watched her, not the distracted version who'd hidden in anonymity, but the full version, the one with call signs tattooed on other people's bodies, the one who'd walked through deserts and pulled people out of fire. Emma's mother was kneeling beside a child's bed, signing a story about warriors. Emma's mother wasn't the person she'd thought she was. Emma's mother was someone far larger. The trembling wasn't fear. It was restraint. The kind of restraint it took not to break everything in sight when the world finally acknowledged what you'd always known about yourself. That you were never just anything. That quiet people in quiet jobs sometimes held the heaviest weight. That the strongest warriors were often the ones no one recognized. Megan O'Brien stood. Gator was watching from the hallway. Sergeant Chen was watching from the corner. General Hawthorne was watching from the doorway. And somewhere in the network of that hospital, every person who'd watched her get humiliated was now understanding that they'd been in the presence of something they'd failed to recognize. She looked at Emma through the window and nodded once. A full acknowledgement. A promise. The kind of promise that said, I'm still here. I'm still your mother. I'm just also something else now. And that's okay. The boot stayed on Marcus's bed. The story would stay with him. And Megan O'Brien, Senior Chief Petty Officer, Navy Cross recipient, the operator they'd called Angel 6, walked back into her shift wearing her scrubs and her invisible rank, checking vitals and adjusting full lines because that was where the real work happened. That was where people actually needed her. That was where she'd chosen to be, even when the world had finally remembered why she mattered. Have you ever had a moment where someone you thought you knew turned out to be something entirely different? Where quiet strength revealed itself as the most dangerous kind? Tell me in the comments, what hidden strength have you discovered in yourself or someone close to you? And if you know someone who's been underestimated, overlooked, or written off as broken, tell them their story matters. Subscribe for more stories about the warriors walking among us. The ones in scrubs. The ones pushing wheelchairs. The ones we walked past every single day without understanding who they really were.